is the Amidon Planet Podcast, episode 45. I'm your host, Joel Amidon. Thank you for joining me on this never-ending quest to figure out how to teach better. And I mean that. Thank you. I mean, for spending time listening to this podcast. I appreciate it. Everyone who I hear and I see the downloads, and I don't know all the faces or names, but I am thankful every single time. You know, in a rough year, in putting stuff out there, and you know, having kind of a struggle this spring. And I think anyone who's a professional educator is you're tired. You're tired. I know I'm tired. I know thankfully our semester ended. Had a great semester. But just towards the end, it felt like it was like the last. I've ran a few half marathons, and it felt like the last 3 miles of a half marathon, where it's like, okay, got over the hard part, but still got to finish, and that's where I'm at. And just kind of taking a breath, trying to figure out some things as we go into the summer. Want to still put out good content, and thinking about all of you out there that are listening. But I just, first and foremost, just want you to know that I am thankful. I'm thankful. So appreciate all you out there. And for all of you that are professional educators, I'm saying prayers for you. Prayers for rejuvenation, prayers for finishing strong, prayers for everything. So let's keep it going. On today's episode of the Amidon Planet Podcast, we have David Waddell. David is a longtime friend. He's a teacher, an author. He's a professional pun crafter. If you put anything out there and a pun is available, David is jumping on that. And we had a chance to interact at church the other day. And, you know, I just thought, like, hey, here's a guy he teaches at the university, and we'll get into that in the episode. And then also he's started writing books, and he's already on as you're going to hear in the episode, his 4th book. And taking his life experience, taking the stories as he accumulated, connecting them to the Bible, and putting them out there. So we just kind of at the coffee machine at church, we were like, hey, why don't I have you on the podcast? Why don't we talk about teaching through storytelling? And it just made sense. So this episode is probably long overdue. It's one of those things where it's like someone that's right in front of your face, like that has something to share and has a unique perspective and a gift for telling stories. And it's like, why don't we share that on the podcast? And so thankful for this opportunity, thankful for podcasts and the ability to share conversations. I think I've said it many, many times, but the ability to have a conversation with David, get a lot of golden nuggets, and be able to share those golden nuggets with anyone that listens is a privilege. And again, thankful for all you out there. So without further delay, actually, wait, we're going to talk about books. If we talk about books, we got to do the book disclaimer. So before I jump into the conversation with David, just a quick disclaimer. You know it. In no way will we be able to communicate the whole value of the books that David has written. And even if we did, it would be from our perspective. In other words, if you like what you hear, go get the books for yourself. I'm going to put a lot of links in the show notes. They'll be at amidonplanet.com/episode 45. So you can purchase the books, David's books, through those links. But you can also, if you just get inspired to think about books, maybe think about writing your own books. You might want to go find a book on writing books. Try to support those local booksellers like Square Books here in Oxford, Mississippi. I don't get anything from Square Books. I just really enjoy them, and they do great stuff. And I know that there's probably a local bookseller near you that's probably doing great stuff as well, especially during these times. Let's support them. So without further delay now, here's my conversation with David Waddell. David Waddell, thank you for joining me on this episode of the Amidon Planet Podcast. How are you doing?
Joel, I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me. You know me. I always love to talk, so this is making my day.
That's right. At least we both have some coffee too, because that's usually where we find ourselves, with a cup of coffee in our hand and talking to each other. So cheers. So David, we've known each other for I think it was probably at a 6 a.m. meeting at the Orchard Church in Oxford, Mississippi.
2012, I think.
Yeah. We were doing these little leadership meetings. I think Pat Ward was facilitating that, and I think that's when I met you for the first time. But for those that don't know you, could you give just a little bit of background on who you are, both as a little bit on your background, and maybe a little bit of background on your teaching, and then also on your books?
Yeah, I sure can. I was born and raised in both the Kansas City area and Springfield, Missouri areas. for high school, college, growing up, and all that. Went to Southwestern Seminary and launched a career in church recreation. Worked in local churches for about 20 years in both youth ministry and recreation ministry. And all of that led me down a different path of a career into teaching at the University of Mississippi in sport and recreation administration. Seems like my entire career, I told someone I was at a conference this week, and I realized that I've been in some form of recreation business for 45 years. Now, that
Wow.
I started when I was 2. Thankfully, this is a audio broadcast, and they can't see how bad I'm lying. But no, just had some chances while I was at a church, my home church in Springfield, Missouri, serving as their recreation minister. I did some adjunct teaching for Missouri State, and I think that helped qualify me when I applied at Ole Miss. And or there was no other remotely qualified candidates. I'm not sure which, but I got the job teaching. About 9 years ago, I had some heart trouble and ended up in the hospital with it. It was the second time that I'd had the atrial fibrillation, where half of your heart is beating and the other half is kind of just jiggling and dancing. And out of that, of course, social media was going, Facebook and all that. So I put together just kind of a tongue-in-cheek top 10 reasons I was glad I had heart trouble, and just was being my normal crazy self. But it was some important points as well, like not letting go of grudges because you never know when the end is coming, restoring relationships, being thankful for connections. A place that I worked in Memphis was concerned for me, got me a second opinion. I've never paid a dime for it. I think they covered the visit to one of the top cardiologists at the University of Tennessee in Memphis Medical Center. So anyway, out of these top 10 things, friends started saying, Dave, this is good stuff. And when are you going to write a book and all that? And one friend in particular asked me if I could print out the top 10 reasons and put it in book form for her birthday. And I said, I can, but why would you want it? And she said, David, you don't know how good of a writing this is. You're talented. Well, Joel, for 20 years in church work, I wrote weekly newsletters and all that. I mean, I'm telling you, no one ever came up and said, wow, David, this is brilliant. This is fabulous. What are you doing working in the church? Get out there and start, none of that happened, but all of a sudden it did. And one of the things that's always concerned me is how much Christians, followers of Jesus, deify some of the Bible characters like Peter and Abraham. And I got to realizing they're just like you and me, and we're just like them. So I got the idea of taking situations out of my own life and comparing them to things that the Bible characters did. For example, Peter in one verse, right before he meets Jesus, Moses, and Elijah, the verse in the scripture actually says, Peter, not knowing what to say, spoke. And unfortunately, I have far too many times in my life that I didn't know what to say, but I spoke. And so I just put all of those things together, and it created the first 2 books of combining my life with the Bible. And so I write in what I call a theme, taking the Bible personally. And so relating personal stories to biblical truths. And so I out of that, I ended up with characters of the Bible, holiday biblical characters, one called Worship Wars, where I related aspects of worship to the kings of Israel and Judah. And a fourth one is under contract to come out later this year, based on Paul's letters that he wrote to 3 churches and 1 person while he was in prison. And I'm titling it A Cell Call from Paul. Always love to play on words.
That's right. If anyone knows David, if anyone knows you, you're a punny guy. And I think of you, there's a guy on Instagram who Katie and I, my wife, are very, we like to listen to, because he just does these like puns and he's pretending he's saying them to his son, and there's always like a secondary pun and then another pun, and like how do you know where the weight room is at Hogwarts? You look for the dumbbell doors. That's the something about a cheese factory that blew up in France. There was debris everywhere.
Yeah. And that's a Gouda pun.
See, oh yeah, that's right. Always quick, but yeah, like the characters of the Bible book, the holiday biblical characters. But I mean, they're pretty neat, and we had in the fact that you open yourself up, and then you also open up the Bible up and saying like, hey, there's connections here between, how I've had some, mix-ups in my life, and then also with these stories that are in the Bible, and then also then makes everything relatable to ourselves, that maybe we're putting too much pressure on ourselves to live up to a certain expectation, when, hey, it's not about being perfect. It's about being honest, and then about trying to keep getting better. Right.
Yeah. And someone pointed out, they said, David, I noticed you didn't have stories where you related yourself to Jesus. Not quite there yet. Just not quite there yet.
Yeah. I don't know. That might have to be the final book there.
The final chapter. Yeah. I find myself related to Jacob and Peter the most. And the old comedian Grady Nutt used to refer to Peter as the Barney Fife of the disciples. If you've ever seen the Andy Griffith show, Peter was the kind of guy that would keep the bullet in his pocket.
Well, and again, like I've had a number of experiences, and and I actually remember Pat having that sermon at the Orchard about really diving into Peter a little bit on his character, and it's like you do see. Again, if you look at the reading the Bible and looking at the characters like you have, and you see like, yeah, they are just like people too. Like, Peter was always quick to say something like, "Oh, I will, I'll never, what? What is I'll always be with you, Lord," or something like that.
I'll
and like,
never deny you.
Never deny you. Thank you. Never deny you. And then like Jesus, like, nope, you are going to. There's going to be a sign. There's going to be a rooster that's going to crow, and then you'll know. So yeah, it's pretty cool the way that you did that. So I mean, so you're kind of harnessing within these books the power of storytelling, like in thinking about the stories that are in your life, the stories that are in the Bible, and trying to put them together, and seeing how powerful stories are in communicating things. And I think, what's cool is I'm in math education, and, we're seeing like the power of context in helping teach stories. And it's like, well, Jesus did it 2,000 years ago. So, like we're just figuring it out now. But I mean, still, what do you see as the power of storytelling?
Well, it does do that sense that it relates people to their own life or to modern occurrences. But I think the greatest thing about a storytelling experience is it resonates with people. If even in math, and I'm not the greatest math guy in the world, but when they started telling problems like, if a man is driving from Chicago, the famous math question, if a man is driving from Chicago at so many miles per hour, and the guy's leaving Salt Lake City, where will they meet? What mileage marker? And you can see someone driving. And as poor as I am at math, that story still resonates with me, because I will do math in my head. If I'm driving to Memphis and it's 41 miles and I'm driving 70 miles an hour, I try to pinpoint the time on the clock that I'll arrive in Memphis. Mm-hmm. Now, I made a D in Algebra 1 in high school, but I'm doing algebra on the highway. And so it's just those stories that continue to resonate. When I put the first book out, I was amazed at how many people that texted or wrote reviews and said, "Oh my gosh, I was the sibling that hid candy also." Or, I did the same thing. I was on safety patrol and became the Barney Fife of the stairway. And so stories just relate to people, because we've all lived life. And when I tell stories in class about traffic circles, which I think were created by Satan, the students all understand, because a lot of them come to Oxford and have never driven in one, and it's so goofy and
they're
weird.
everywhere.
Yeah, and they are, and they're building them more and more. Apparently, they've got this statistic that it actually helps traffic. But I also know, I tell my students 63.2% of all statistics are fabricated on the spot. And then I just wait and see how many of them catch it.
That's right.
But it's just a powerful way of making a point or relating a truth. I can tell my students the technique that I would use to terminate employees when I was in a recreation practitioner position. I also can tell them a story about a young man that I had to terminate, who wasn't in the right place working for me, and later went to work for Chick-fil-A and introduced me to the chicken biscuit with extra butter. Because he said, if you order it with extra butter, you get fresh chicken, you get a fresh biscuit because they can't unwrap it based on health codes, plus you get extra butter. So when I'm telling the story about this, I try to relay the truth that when you terminate someone, it's not always the end of their life. It may be the beginning of their life.
Mm-hmm.
And for the rest of my time with these students, they know that I like chicken biscuits with extra butter. That's the relating thing. So when they see a chicken biscuit, they're probably remembering Mr. Waddell taught us once about the proper way to terminate. So that's the power of stories in my thinking.
Oh yeah. And like, just, like you're saying all these, and just going back to your books, like they're nice because they're like little bite-sized pieces of story. Like it's not something you don't necessarily have to read from cover to cover. You can jump in and you've got, the citations from the Bible that you're kind of connecting to within each story. And so you can dive in here and there, but the stories that then, like you're saying, resonate, and then like, oh yeah, I've had that experience too. And and then the thing that you do so brilliantly is like make that connection to some biblical truth. And it's like, oh, that I had never thought about my own experience connecting to that. I've just learned a little bit of something about myself and us sharing this like common story with each other.
Right.
So.
Yeah, the one that always tickled me was the first story that I thought of doing was the story of Joseph. Everyone always feels sorry for him because his brothers abused him, put him in a pit, sold him to Egypt. And but I was the middle of three boys, Joel. And so I know Joseph was not innocent. When his dad gave him the favored coat of many colors, I don't think Joseph just took the coat and secretly hid it in his room. He walked in front of his brothers. He reminded them of who dad loved the most. And I mean, he was probably the most obnoxious brother in the world. And I was that brother. So when mom or dad would bring candy home from the store, my brothers would eat theirs up right then. I would eat part of it and then hide it in my sock drawer or somewhere in a closet. And then weeks later or a month later, I would pull it out and I wouldn't just eat it. I would tantalize them with it, like take a small bite of chocolate and then just, oh my gosh, this is good. And of course, my brothers are saying, can we have some? No, you ate yours. You. And so, I mean, just ugly. So I figure if there was a caravan, an Egyptian caravan that came through Kansas City, my brothers would have sold me into slavery. My younger brother says that they wanted the brothers to pay the Egyptians to take me, so that's why I stayed in the family. But Joseph was not a good guy, and the reason it took him so long to finally get to where God could use him was that he had this sense of pride and entitlement that just had to be broken, and that's the life of Dave also.
That's right. Yeah. No, so I am the youngest and I married an oldest child. And so there is some comparisons about our lives growing up and a little bit different here and there.
Yeah. And my heart goes out to your daughter because she's the middle child. And we all know the middle child is the most abused in any family.
That's right. Oh yeah. We could tell some stories about her. So, but we won't. She's in that age where it's like just walk on by.
Yeah, I saw the other day something posted. I like she's in middle school.
She's going to be in middle school, and she made the dance team, and as you know, you've seen her, she would like never stop moving. I'm like, well, finally she's found her
Yeah,
lane, and she's
yeah.
loving it. So
I just, I guess I never expected your kids to grow older as we grew older, you know?
yeah, that's right. They should stay the same. Like, and that's what we have the pictures in our, well, the pictures on the little Google Hub thing that's rolling through, and you see all these like little pictures of, you know, baby Noah and like
Right.
Annie and something like, and then Jackson. Well, then, and actually, it goes back to your stories. Like, there's not as many pictures of Jack as there were of Noah back in the day. So that's how it happens, you know. Different treatment. So from your books, David, maybe give a little bit of flavor. What is your favorite teaching story, like, or one of your favorites? I know you have probably many.
I have several, yeah, but I would say this: I am such a storyteller. Sometimes the stories are truthful, like out of my life, etc. But when I was growing up, I enjoyed fabricating and making up my own stories. And one of the stories my parents told me over and over again was about the boy who cried wolf. You know, the guy that he lied about the wolves attacking, and then finally the wolves did attack. And because I came home from school one day and told my mom that Yogi Bear, the cartoon character, had rode home on the school bus with me. And of course, they were getting aggravated with my made up stories and imagination. So she said, "Did he really? Are you sure?" And I said, "Yeah." So Dad gets home from work, and she said, "Dave, tell your dad who was on your school bus." And I said, "It was Yogi Bear." And Dad looks puzzled, and he says, "Well, how can that be? He rode home from work with me." And I mean, I was totally gone. So that was one of my early stories. The ones I enjoy most, I think, is anytime Jesus dealt with the disciples, because so much of my life is in correlation with them. I can imagine James and John going to Jesus and asking Jesus if he wanted them to pray down fire from heaven to destroy the Samaritans. If I had $1 for every time I asked God to punish someone, you know, I could retire now. But I think more than anything, the way he dealt with Jesus, with the way that Jesus dealt with Peter. Peter speaking, not knowing what he said, kind of thing. But one of my favorites is when Peter announces that Jesus is the Christ. And then Jesus says, well, I have to go into Jerusalem and die. And Peter pulls him to the side and says, "I wouldn't talk like that if I were you." And just the gall of Peter to tell the master how things are going to be just tickled me. And but I also like David and Goliath. I always root for the underdog. You know, I've been a lifelong fan of Kansas City baseball and football. I fell in love with the Los Angeles Lakers when the Boston Celtics were beating the crud out of them every year in the 1960s. And so David and Goliath is a particularly good one. And I love especially where David says to the giant, "Today you'll be buzzard bait," or the King James said, "The birds of the air will feast on your carcass." But just pulling those things out, the little guy wins, the way God involves himself in the lives of people, all of those are great stories. But I think Peter's dealing with Jesus is probably my best teaching stories.
Yeah. No, that's good. So, you know, so when you finally took the leap to start writing these stories down and writing the books, like, what were some learnings that you had, like, in that process? I mean, because I can't imagine, like, where you're kind of going through your entire life and picking out these stories and seeing how they make these connections. What were some learnings that you had?
Well, one of the things was, I mean, it started off with just a few initial stories. But then what I did was I would take particular Bible characters and study them. And it was just like kabam, memory pops up. There's one where Peter is trying to patrol Jesus's entry, and he's pushing people away, keeping the kids away from Jesus. And it kind of reminded me of being the new sheriff in town kind of thing, like Peter's, taking control, running the show. And all of a sudden, out of my memory pops up, and I had not remembered it up until that time. In fourth grade, elementary, I was placed on stair duty. So I had to get to school early. I wore one of those orange vests, and I kept the behavior on the stairwell and everything. And I was the same way. Hey, stop that, blow my whistle, keep them moving. And I mean, I just took the authority to the extra degree. So I just learned some things in memory about my life, and just saw how through the mix of stupidity and sinfulness, how God got me to where I am to this point. That was probably the greatest learning aspect. In the sense of writing, I read some things about people that write, and there's kind of two different schools of thought. One is dedicate an hour each day, sit down and write, even if you're not inspired. Just spit out something, you go back and look at it later. I would just stare at a computer screen for an hour. Nothing would come. I'm more of what I call the inspirational writer. The downside to that is inspiration usually hits at 1 or 2 in the morning. You wake up with a thought. I've got a little pad to the side. This same friend that helped me get into writing gave me a book that's called Ideas by Me, and it's just blank pages inside. So I had that on my bedstand with a pen, so that if a great idea would come to me, I could get up, write it down, then go back to sleep. The only problem was I would write the idea down, I would lay back down, and then I would start developing the story in my head. There were many times on all 3 books that I would get up and start typing, and then my alarm would go off. So it was time to get ready to go to work. And so I learned really what style works best with me. My creativity is an early morning time. And so tap into that.
The thing that really struck me, because I've, I don't know, when I knew you before you started on the first book, correct, Dave?
Correct.
Yeah. So, I mean, thinking about like all the, we've had some common time in children's ministry at our church together, like where we both have a common love about making a fool of ourselves in front of children. So it's yes. Great. Yeah. Good way to connect with them. But then also too, just seeing like, okay, David has this impact of when he's teaching in front of I've seen you also teach in front of the church. I've seen you teach in front of kids, and then you're teaching at the university, and you have this impact, but then the writing allows that impact to then go even further. And there's probably people that, you would never have interacted with that now somehow got a hold of your book and now are learning from you in teaching through the book. And I heard a professor when I was first starting my doctoral degree, and I was asking him like, so what's next for these ideas that you have? And he's like, well, that's why I wrote the book, so I could put them out there, and then somebody else can take them to the next level. And it's like, that's so cool, is thinking like all these stories that you put out into the world where people, are using them to, help teach themselves about maybe this is a little bit better way for them to get closer to the Bible. Maybe it's a better way for them to think about some of these lessons that are contained within, and like all those sorts of benefits of your teaching that are now out into the world. And like, I think that emphasis on writing and getting them down so they can go out into the world and have a life beyond your physical presence is kind of amazing.
I thank you for that. That's one of the things I think that's most valuable about writing. We know in history that up to a certain point, even the Bible was just an oral tradition. Mm-hmm. This generation tells the next generation. Finally, someone said, we ought to put this on paper. And, that's probably the reason that we have it as accurate as we do today, is because someone finally wrote it down. It does expand influence in incredible ways. And I've told folks the delusion of grandeur in my mind is that I thought one day God would use me to impact thousands of people at one time. And what I realized is instead, he has gifted me with the ability to influence thousands of people one at a time. Mm. And that I'm not going to be the one that stands in front of a full stadium telling a story, but I'll be the one that puts it on paper and let people hear it. Or I'll be in that small group of children or in a class of 50 and have the storytelling ability to influence those folks. I get tickled at the number of kids who are now teenagers when you and I started working in children's ministry that still remember the songs that you and I did and the stories that you and I told. Pat Ward told me once, who was our former pastor at the church, said that when they would go through some of their family devotions, his kids would say, Daddy, this is how Mr. David said it. And so, you do this, the stories just have an impact. And I've always felt like it was most important, especially with Bible stories, to make them come alive for people. And I think even in teaching university students, if you can allow them to come alive, but I do storytelling in the classroom the same way. They see me, I tell them things I fouled up on. I confess that I was a visionary and I really stunk at details with things. And I just think that helps influence people. But putting it on paper is great. You just never know. And really, even in the teaching aspect, you're a math educator. You're sending people out that will then have careers in math and mostly teaching math. The ripple effect on what a story or what a teacher does is incredible. So I'm just glad to be on the team.
Yeah. Well, and that's like, I think Pat might have shared this like piece of research. They looked at like TED Talks of people watching TED Talks. And when a TED Talk starts with a story, you talk about resonating. Well, like actually like the brains would like their brain patterns would like match with people because they were like connecting to a story that someone is telling, and then to bring it into like whatever the lesson is. Like there is so much power there. So it's not even just like anecdotally, because we all know, I don't think anyone listening to this would say like that stories are not powerful, but stories are powerful, but like they have that way of sticking with us. And even like you said, years later, the kids are remembering these lessons that you taught because of the stories that you told. And so there is so much power. And that's where I have, we do a lot with portfolios in our department and thinking about these mile markers of the development. And really what they are is these teachers, these pre-service teachers capturing stories. Like, I still remember the story of the first test I gave. It was a written learning celebration with Joe Dye, who was a previous guest. He's a storyteller too, but previous guest on the podcast. But he let me write a celebration of learning, and it was awful, but he let me do it and let me have an experience. And so that I could think like, okay, how am I going to recover? How am I going to do it? And it still stuck with me about how the lessons I learned from that event. And now I have a story, and I have a story not only on my own development, but also to share with the teachers that I get a chance to work with now. So it's so cool how that works.
I agree. Now, one of the questions you posed at me in our previous conversation about this podcast was, what's the downside? What's the possible critical part of a story? And it's so funny that the very thing that's good about stories can also be harmful about stories. I have students that know I like chicken biscuits with extra butter, but they don't relate the story back to the truth. And I have people that remember I hid the candy, but don't remember the relationship to Joseph. And so sometimes people remember the humor or the cuteness of something and don't necessarily come back into the truth. That's where the storyteller has to really drive it home. And Jesus was an expert at this. He would tell the story, and there were a couple of cases in the Gospels where the disciples would come back and say, okay, what does that mean? And then he would share with them.
Yeah, let them struggle a little bit.
Yeah.
So, given all your experience, so you talk about that we're gonna possibly have another book coming out, and so like that'll be 4. So you've done a lot of writing and thinking about like putting these stories down and thinking about how to teach this way. What would you have done differently now in hindsight, having written all these books?
Well, that's a great question. One answer to that is get some good editing. My first 2 books didn't get the kind of editing. At one point, someone said to me, "There's a difference in proper English and hillbilly English." And my college writing instructor, I told him the difficulty I had with writing was that I write like I speak. And he said, "Well, that's not a problem." And then I spoke some and he understood the problem. So getting good editing, I think the greatest lesson I had is that people do judge a book by their cover. Mm. So the first one, I wanted to convey the message that it was a serious topic in humorous ways. So I used cartoon biblical characters on the front. And to this day, people still say, "Oh, you wrote a children's book." And I don't know why. I mean, there's tons of adult cartoons, on TV, but for some reason, the animation or the cartoon figure on my book made them think it's a children's book. I am planning to fix that. The 7th anniversary of the first book is in February of 2022.
Wow.
I'm probably going to come out with a new cover and a new rebranding and some better editing on it. Right after it came out, a couple in church came up to me and said, "How many chapters are in the Gospel of Mark?" And I said 16. For some reason, I knew that. And they said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm sure." So they pulled out the book and pointed to one of the chapters where I referred to Mark chapter 24 or 28 or something. I meant Matthew, but I put Mark in it. I missed it. The publisher's editing crew missed it. So I think what I've learned is, number one, get good editing. Let the cover speak to what the book is really about. And then recognize that humanity is still involved. And it's never going to be perfect.
That's right. No, that's good. So if you were asked to sum up teaching in stories in 7 words or less, this was a challenge. It's the challenge I put to people. And this is all coming from the Michael Pollan's in Defense of Food, Eat Food, Not Too Much, Mostly Plants, where he kind of puts that on the cover. It's like, well, there it is. There's, if you want to save, $25, here's the message of this book. Well, what's the message of teaching with stories?
And by the way, this was the most challenging question. I'm not on Twitter because 280 bytes is not enough. My students told me I was a 7-course dinner in a 280 byte world. So summing it up, so I've come up with this. Do you want them to remember? Tell stories.
Nice. That is excellent. I like it. So
the stories just resonate. People remember stories. And, Ancestor.com is making a killing of finding your story, finding your path for your past. And stories tell us more. And, my younger brother did some work on the genealogy of our family and finding out who we are. Until then, I couldn't even remember the name of my great-grandfather on my dad's side. Because, we go from generation to generation and lose some of that stuff. But I tell people, I have no doubt because of the way that my boys were raised and the way I was raised by my father and him by his father, I have no doubt that my great-grandfather or his father before him was probably very witty, probably enjoyed life, and I like to say was incredibly good looking and modest. But, we carry the traits on through. And
that's
so the
right.
stories we hear, in fact, one of the regrets I have in life is I didn't ask my dad more stories of his childhood growing up before he left us. And you know, I've hit mom for some because she's still with us. But those are the things that help us tie the past to us. And I think of the words that Moses gave to the people after the tablets came down, and he said, "Tell this to your children."
Mm-hmm.
The story of how we got out of Egypt and got into the promised land is the story that they will reflect back on. When times are tough, you reflect back on the story of how God brought you through another situation. So storytelling is key to learning.
Yeah, and you find when the Old Testament, when they lost their stories, when they couldn't find where it was written, they didn't remember who they were. That's when they got in trouble a lot. Yeah, and then all of a sudden, they find it like, whoa, all right, let's straighten up this house a little bit.
When I was studying the Kings for the worship war book, Josiah, they were cleaning out the temple because it had just been demolished and abused. And he found the law and some of the stories of Moses. And the Bible says he ripped his clothes in anguish and cried and realized, you know, how lost we have become. Mm-hmm. So stories do the trick.
Yeah. No, and I can tell. So like when you say, like, if you want to remember, tell stories, like I used to teach about the law of sines. And this is the where the angle of one side of the angle of a triangle and the matching side across from that angle, like they're all in perfect proportion across the triangle. Anyway, we would use it like we were deriving it in class, and that you could imagine that might not be the most exciting thing to do in a math class. Well, we created an event where it was always like whatever movie it was around. It was always in the spring. So there's some movie that was going to be coming out and like, you know, Memorial Day that was on the trailers and stuff. And so one year is about, you know, the new Star Wars movie that was coming out. Another way was about the Superman movie that was coming out. And we would like create some sort of situation where the triangle is like Lois Lane is here and a building is falling over here. And where should Superman go? And we need to figure out some distances and things. And what do we do? And like, let's create the law of sines. And so, and, you know, it was silly. It was, but you know what? I bet you it was memorable, you know, from those experiences. And so, you know, that's a good sum for 7. That's pretty good. So, you know, you've done a lot of teaching, you know, you're talking about how long you experienced business ministry and then also here at the University of Mississippi. Besides storytelling, maybe if there's something that's specific technique or a strategy that you use in your teaching, but maybe it is just storytelling, but what is the best thing you do to help your teaching?
The best thing that's helped me, besides the storytelling, is the reference to the old 80-20 rule. And I've come to realize that 20%, generally 20% of every class I have are students that genuinely want to learn what I have to tell them. And 80% are there for the grade or to get through and get a diploma. And what I have to remind myself is to not let the 80% aggravate me and impact how well I influence the 20%. Mm-hmm. So I try to shoot for the 20 and be excited and enthusiastic for them. I may carry some of the 80 over. Some of the 80 will never care. But if I pinpoint my teaching out of aggravation on the 80, I hurt the 20. Mm-hmm. And so I just go into classes recognizing that 20% are going to be with me. And I've discovered, although I'm not a big fan of online learning because of the lack of I think education is more relational than informational. But even in online learning, it's still about 20% are getting things done on time, asking questions, checking in. 80% are you know, and the figures can fluctuate. It's not a pure 80-20, but I just try to take care of the 20.
Well, yeah. And two and that's a good message because, you know, sometimes if it is that side where if you might lose some of the 20 if you're just completely focused in on that 80. And so like the people that are there, that what you're talking about is like at the center of who they are and where they want to be going forward. And they're, you know, you focused in on the 80. And it's like, well, they're like, I'm here, I'm ready. You know, like, you know, give me what you got and I'll run with it. And yeah, you might grab some people over from the other side. So, I mean, I've taught math to ninth graders when I was a high school math teacher. And some, it was a required class, and it was like, and I liked it. I liked the challenge of trying to, there's folks that really identified as doers of mathematics and some that did not. And whether that was like their parents communicating, like, we're not math people and stuff like that. I've had own family members tell that their family members were not math people. I'm like, hey, I'm in the family. Come on. Like, wait, yes, we are. But and then trying to win them more, and like saying like, this is exciting stuff. Like, there's pretty cool things, like how you can understand your word a little bit better through this stuff. And like, at least at a minimum, they see like, wow, this person cares about what they're talking about. And I can see that in what they do. And so, there's a level of respect there as well for that kind of teaching.
Very good. And I'll say, even though I'm not a math person, there's 2 or 3 stories about my experiences with math in the book. So they're more about maybe perhaps a biblical character's failure in something, but
well, I'll push you there. If you're living and breathing, you're a math person. So
that's true. Well, like I said, I try to figure out how much time 41 miles will take me to get to Memphis.
That's right. Real quick, I'm going to give you a chance to talk through a couple, but I did want to ask you a couple quick fire questions. Okay. Because I know you've got an opinion on them. Where is the best barbecue in the country?
The best barbecue in the country. If you want pork, I'm going to suggest that you go to Cozy Corner in Memphis.
Okay.
Or Jack's Stack in Kansas City.
Nice.
Or Arthur Bryan in Kansas City would be a good stop also. In Texas, there is a little town of Taylor, Texas, with a place called Muller's Barbecue. And get the brisket and the beef ribs there. Just incredible. That's Texas, Casey. Now in Carolina, I'm still a rookie. I haven't found my best. Now for pork sausage, there's a Pig Out Inn in Natchez, Mississippi.
Nice.
That you got to go to, because you can cut into that sausage and put it in your mouth, and you can taste the smoke.
No.
I haven't done much study in this. I don't know if.
Nice. And then, because I know you've toured a lot of baseball parks too, right?
Yes.
What's your favorite place other than Kansas City? So to see a baseball game.
Other than Kansas City, let me think real quick. Well, I'll tell you what. I'm a history of baseball kind of guy. Love the game. My trip to Wrigley Field in Chicago was just absolutely incredible. First time I was there, a lady that I'd worked with at a retirement home in Memphis her daughter lived in Chicago, so she was my tour guide. We got into Wrigley Field. They were doing the Star Spangled Banner. And when it was over, she turned to me to say, let's go find our seats. And my eyes were kind of full of water. And she said, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that patriotism got you that much. I said, well, I am a patriot, but I pointed out to the field. I said, that's where Babe Ruth pointed to center field. And this is where Billy Williams played. And Hank Aaron was over here. And just the whole aspect of baseball history was incredible.
Yeah.
I also made it to Fenway, but I was disappointed because they had painted advertising on the left field wall.
Mm.
And I thought, you prostituted yourself, people. It was the Green Monster. It was an icon of baseball, and they sold out. And so I was disappointed with that one. Probably Wrigley Field, other than the Kansas City park, would love to get back to. There's just something about Wrigley that they don't have racing weenies, and they don't do the innings. They just play baseball, and it's a beautiful, beautiful place.
Taking a shot at that, my beloved Milwaukee Brewers with the racing sausages. Come on now.
Now I got to say the sliding into the beer mug was a good thing that the Brewers did for a long time. So
yeah. Speaking of storytelling, like there was nothing like listening to Bob Euchre on the radio.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, he was a character.
I used to make fun of people for binge watching, but I'm finding myself finding anything Bob Euchre's done on YouTube and just listening to it. And the man is a classic.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, my dad would listen to, and like we were awful for so long. And I mean, and still like the other guy, like he, for years now, and I think this might be his last year, but for years it was like he'd take an inning off and the other guy would come in and blah, blah, blah. But the other guy would never leave. He'd just sit there and you just hear him cackling in the background because, you know, Bob Euchre's throwing out some, you know, toss away line. It's just like, just a hilarious guy.
They reported when he did Major League, the movie Major League, a lot of what he said was not scripted. That they just put the mic in front of him and said, go.
Right. He was right in his wheelhouse. That was perfect. Oh my gosh. Harry Doyle. That's right.
Harry Doyle. That's right.
That's right.
It's just missed outside.
That's right. Just a bit outside. Yeah, that's perfect. All right. So we have some links that we're going to share in the class, I was going to say class notes. Oh my goodness. The semester is over, folks. In the show notes. So they'll be on at abbottonplanet.com. We'll have some links in the show notes, but what do you have to promote, David?
Well, one of the links is a link to my actual website where you'll see some weekly posts. You'll have record of some of my blogs and also some explanation on the books. My Facebook page, you'll see some of the similar types of posts, but the Facebook page that's listed there will have some other aspects and posts that I've put in. Both of those, as well as the WordPress link for my blog, probably will give you a good idea about my writing before you try to buy anything on Amazon. And so you can kind of see how I use stories and pull truth out of things. And so those would be the three I would look at. And then if exploring, and on Amazon, each of them that you click, you can do that, read this and find the first few chapters of each book. I find they're easy to keep up with. Joel, you mentioned that they're, short stories. You don't have to sit down and commit yourself to a 300-page book. I call it writing in a short attention span disorder. Mm-hmm. I'm not the long story guy. Let's tell the story, laugh, get on to the next story. And so you can kind of see that in the blog items. Most of my writing, when I do it on a normal 8.5 by 11 Microsoft Word, is 2 to 2.5 pages. Nice. So you don't have to invest a lot of time. You can catch a story, go on. A lot of people, Joel, use the books as daily devotionals. Mm-hmm. Because it's just 2 pages long, 3 or 4 maybe in a book, but it has the scripture reference. All of my writing always has a reference back to the scripture, personal story, and then the truth that we can take out of it. Excellent.
Well, thank you, David, and appreciate all that you do, and appreciate you sharing your time with us today.
Joel, it was an honor to be on your podcast. I do follow you or stalk you religiously. I've always been amazed at the man you are.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yes. All right. When I think about good people that I've met when we moved down here to Mississippi, David Waddell makes a list. He's definitely on that list. Always quick with a compliment, a funny story, and a nugget of wisdom, as you can kind of hear from this episode. So that's a good guy to have around. So thankful for David. And I'm glad I had a chance to share a bit of his wisdom and approach to teaching with all of you out there who are listening. And then just thinking about, we all have different ways that we've been made up. We all have different ways that we're trying to create influence with people in order to connect them with something. That's teaching, right? And so I think of teaching broadly. In a future episode, we're going to have Jeff McManus, who is in charge of the team that creates the beautiful landscape around the University of Mississippi. If you've ever been to the University of Mississippi and you've seen it, you're like, this place is amazing. It looks amazing. And what they're able to do with landscape and to make it a beautiful place, not only to work, but to just relax. I mean, it's just a beautiful place to have a walk, a beautiful place to rejuvenate. And it's a thing that I miss about teaching remotely this semester. So looking to get back on campus, but looking also forward to sharing that conversation with Jeff McManus in the near future. So that is all for this episode, though, of the Amazon Planet podcast. Show notes for the podcast can be found at amazonplanet.com/episode 45. And there's lots of links associated with David. Will be in the show notes as well. So go take a look at them. And now, if you're looking for ways to support the podcast, you can subscribe to the podcast wherever you get podcasts so that the latest episode is always available whenever you're ready to listen. Rate or review the podcast if you have that available through your podcast provider. That's always appreciated. Hit the stars, hit the thumbs up, write a little review. Those are always good. And I get notes about those, so I'm very thankful. I know Dr. Bondurant out there has written one, so I'm very thankful to her. Subscribe to the Amazon Planet download. That contains teaching resources and updates from Amazon Planet. Latest update, I share the No Guilt Book Club, which we're running through the Teaching Math Teaching podcast, which is another podcast that I co-host. We talked about that in the last episode. We're smack dab in the middle of this No Guilt Book Club where we're looking at teaching math at a distance, but it's a No Guilt Book Club. So what's great is, let's say you wanted to jump in now, we're going to have another chat. We're having chats on Tuesday via the Amazon Planet Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can catch up on the ones because the videos for those are posted on those pages. But then let's say, you know what, not ready for that, and I want to do something. I'd like to do it, but in June. All right, well, grab a friend, get the books, and then you can watch those episodes, or you can watch those videos, or you can even just wait for the episode that we're going to record at the end as a culminating sort of experience for the Teaching Math Teaching podcast. So anyway, Teresa Wills, who wrote the Teaching Math at a Distance book, is amazing. Her book's amazing, and so especially in a year where where a lot of people have done some remote stuff, like she's got insights, not only for teaching math, but just teaching in general or engaging folks through Zoom, engaging people from a distance. I mean, we're all kind of doing that. I think that's going to be a large part of our culture. So again, teachers is not just those that are paid to teach, but anyone that's doing anything where you're trying to create some sort of relationship with content, that's you're teaching folks. So anyway, that's so Amazon Planet download. You can find links to get the Amazon Planet download at amazonplanet.com. There's lots of links to join the email list. I think there's also a button on Facebook as well. So you can also follow at Amazon Planet on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, or like the Amazon Planet Facebook page. You can also check out the Amazon Planet store or Amazon Planet bookshop. Links in the footer at amazonplanet.com, where you purchase to support the production costs of podcasts. Thinking about offering some other stuff in the store. We're in the planning phase. Again, just finished the semester, taking a breath. All right. In conclusion, thank you for listening to this episode of the Amazon Planet podcast. Thanks to David Waddell for sharing his expertise in his books. Thanks to Matt Mifflin for the music in this episode. Finally, thank you to all of you out there who are seeking to teach better and be the good in the world by investing in the lives of others. The world is a better place because you have decided to use the gifts you have been given to serve others. Thank you for all that you do. Peace.